I wanted to ask you a few
Some
questions
questions. Yeah.
about why did you decide.
I wanted to ask you a few questions about why I decided to write about this subject. For generations, Windsor Castle seemed like one place no senior royal could ever be shut out of. That's why what surfaced behind its ancient walls has left even the most seasoned royal watchers stunned. According to the story now spreading through the kingdom, the late Queen Mary quietly left behind a hidden instruction that didn't fade with her passing. Instead, it waited. And when the details finally emerged, Queen Consort Isolde reportedly found herself facing a restriction so extraordinary that it couldn't simply be brushed aside. Could a secret clause from a departed monarch really reshape a family years later? This is a work of fiction, but it asks a question every royal family, real or imagined, must eventually face. Where does duty end and love begin? If you enjoy sweeping royal drama, secrets, and stories of family loyalty tested to its limits, stay with me. This is the tale of King Aldric, Queen Isolde, Crown Prince Rowan, Princess Freya, and the shadow the late Queen Mary left behind. Imagine being called into one of the most important rooms inside Castle Ravenhall, thinking you're there for a routine legal discussion, only to discover that a decision made years earlier is about to reshape the future of the crown. That is the moment that unfolded when King Aldric, Crown Prince Rowan, Princess Freya, and Queen Isolde gathered inside Ravenhall's administrative chambers, after the royal archivist confirmed the authenticity of a sealed edition to the late Queen Mary's estate instructions. What made the moment so unsettling wasn't merely the existence of the document. It was what Ravenhall itself represented. For 11 generations, the castle had stood as more than a residence. It was the seat of continuity, the physical proof of a dynasty's endurance. So when the royal solicitor revealed that Queen Mary had attached a private clause carrying full legal weight, the air in the room seemed to change. At first, it seemed the restriction might concern something ceremonial, perhaps limits on public appearances or protocol around royal titles. But as the solicitor continued reading, the truth proved far more personal. The clause stated, in unambiguous language, that Queen Isolde could never establish a private residence within Ravenhall, could not hold personal apartments inside its walls, and would hold no authority over its household staff or daily operations, a restriction that extended even into any future in which she might outlive King Aldric. The room fell into a heavy, uncomfortable silence. Aldric, still carrying the weight of his mother's death 3 years earlier, faced an impossible crossroads. On one side stood the woman he had built a life with. On the other stood the final wishes of the woman who had guided the kingdom through 4 difficult decades. Then came a second twist. Beneath the first document sat another, sealed separately. The solicitor refused to discuss its contents until everyone in the room had formally acknowledged the first clause. That refusal only deepened the unease. Isolde's reaction, according to those present, revealed just how personal the moment felt to her. She asked, quietly, why such a measure had been necessary, and whether Mary had somehow anticipated this exact confrontation long before it arrived. As Ravenhall's ancient walls seemed to close in around a gathering, one truth became impossible to ignore. This was never really about property. It was about trust, about loyalty, and about a decision built to echo long after the monarch who made it was gone. For years, King Aldric had believed the hardest chapters of his life were behind him, particularly where Isolde was concerned. After decades of public scrutiny and private doubt, he thought time had finally settled the question of her place within the royal family. She had stood beside him through the most difficult years of his life, and most assumed her position was no longer in question. But inside Ravenhall, old questions have a habit of refusing to disappear. This wasn't a story about popularity, or affection, or even forgiveness. It was about something far more elemental: control. According to conversations that surfaced only after her death, Queen Mary had once confided in her daughter, Princess Freya, that royal residences were rarely shaped by ownership alone. Influence, she believed, moved slowly, through appointments, through access, through the accumulation of small decisions that no single person would ever notice happening. That old warning became suddenly relevant again when the restriction connected to Ravenhall resurfaced. Crown Prince Rowan reportedly viewed the clause as more than an instruction. To him, it was a safeguard, something designed to protect the monarchy's direction long after his father's reign had ended. Freya, for her part, seemed to understand precisely why her mother had placed such weight on it. As legal advisors dug through confidential archives, an old story resurfaced from years earlier: a private reception, a disputed guest list, a locked wing of the castle, and an unauthorized order that had reportedly reached Queen Mary almost simultaneously. Individually, these incidents seemed minor. Together, they had planted a lasting doubt in the old queen's mind. By the time that particular evening ended, a decision had quietly taken shape, one built to outlast the reign in which it was made. That hidden history cast a long shadow over a private conversation between Aldrich and Isolde. When she asked whether she would ever be fully, unconditionally accepted after so many years of loyalty, the answer never fully came. Aldrich hesitated, caught between duty to his family's legacy and devotion to his wife. In that moment, Ravenhall stopped being simply a castle. It became a symbol of belonging, a question that remained unresolved even after all those years. From the outside, everything appeared ordinary. Public engagements, careful smiles, business as usual. But behind the castle walls, a quieter contest was unfolding. Over space, over influence, over a question no one wanted to voice aloud. Who was already preparing for the next era before the current one had ended? During the final years of Queen Marianne's life, small requests had begun moving through the palace's corridors. More room for Isolde's growing household, greater involvement in ceremonial planning, expanded authority over staff and arrangements. Individually, each request seemed reasonable. Together, they painted a picture that unsettled several senior officials. To Marianne, Ravenhall was never merely a residence. It was the physical center of the crown's authority, and every adjustment to it carried meaning far beyond furniture or office space. The turning point, according to the story, arrived not during a public event but after a private memorial gathering for Marianne's late husband. A senior member of staff was instructed to prepare a set of rooms for Isolde's future use, rooms closely tied to Marianne's own household and to decades of personal history. The issue was never really the rooms themselves. It was what granting them, while the queen still lived, would signal that the transition of power had already quietly begun. When word reached Marianne, she understood the deeper message at once. In the private conversation that followed, Isolde reportedly described the request as simple preparation, nothing more than continuity. Marianne heard something else entirely, a line being crossed before permission had ever been given. What followed was swift. Restrictions were drafted. Legal advisors were brought in. Protections around Ravenhall were strengthened, and over time those early warnings hardened into formal, binding provisions. What makes the story more remarkable still is what came later. Long after the documents were finalized, Isolde learned that Aldrich had known of his mother's concerns all along, and had chosen not to raise them with her. What had begun as a dispute over authority became, in an instant, something far more personal, a question of trust between husband and wife. Everyone in that chamber believed the drama had already reached its peak. Tempers were rising. Old grievances, long buried, were spilling into the open. Then a single sealed page changed everything. The argument had nothing to do with anger, in the end. It came from a decision made years earlier by Queen Marianne, a decision that seemed to reach forward from beyond her reign and take command of the room itself. At the center of the dispute stood Ravenhall, not merely as a residence, but as one of the most powerful symbols the monarchy possessed. What looked on its surface like a disagreement over offices and staff assignments was, underneath, a contest over who would shape the castle's future. King Aldrich maintained that the concerns raised years earlier had already been resolved after what officials referred to privately as the East Wing incident. He insisted he had never seen the clause's final wording, and believed the matter closed. Isolde saw it very differently. After decades of standing beside Aldrich through public criticism and private hardship, she felt she was being left to face the consequences of a decision made without her alone. Tension spiked further when she revealed that preliminary plans for a permanent office within Ravenhall had already been quietly approved, staff transfers discussed, facilities considered, preparations underway in anticipation of formal sign-off. The revelation stunned the room. Suddenly, concerns that had once seemed like caution began to look like foresight. When Crown Prince Rowan spoke, he confirmed that every proposed transfer had already been frozen. His measured tone did nothing to ease the tension. Then came the second surprise. Princess Freya entered, carrying a second sealed document. She did not hand it to her brother, the king. She placed it before the solicitor instead. As its contents were read aloud, the room fell completely silent. Queen Marianne, it turned out, had foreseen the possibility of exactly this conflict, a collision between family loyalty and royal duty. Rather than leave that burden to her son, she entrusted it to her daughter. Freya had been named guardian of the restriction, responsible for protecting Ravenhall's household structure long after her mother was gone. In that instant, Aldrich understood something painful. His mother had trusted his sister to enforce a decision she feared he might never be able to carry out himself. The king still sat on the throne, but inside Ravenhall's walls, something extraordinary was unfolding that even royal authority couldn't simply override. What makes this part of the story compelling isn't scandal or spectacle. It's the quiet decision made behind closed doors, tied to the final wishes of a mother who had understood her family's strengths and weaknesses better than anyone alive. As confusion spread through the castle, Freya found herself carrying a responsibility she had never wanted. There was no triumph in what she was doing. Those closest to her said the weight of it was visible in everything she did. If there had been any way to set the burden aside without abandoning her mother's wishes, she would have taken it immediately. But duty offered her no easy path. The deeper officials looked, the more troubling the picture became. Plans had quietly been developing to build an entire administrative structure around Queen Isolde. New offices, support staff, communications teams, household arrangements. On paper, each element seemed harmless. Together, they represented a gradual transfer of influence that could, over time, reshape daily life inside Ravenhall without ever formally altering a single title. That discovery triggered a chain of quiet, decisive action. Before sunrise, orders moved through corridors that had operated without interruption for years. Staff expecting promotions received cancellation notices. Prepared office spaces were emptied. Access permissions were reviewed. Schedules were rewritten. Proposed transfers vanished almost overnight. Spaces that had once seemed permanently available suddenly required written authorization. Aldrich understood exactly what was happening, and the decision cost him as much as anyone. But once the documents were formally presented, acknowledgement became unavoidable. The moment they were signed, an old, half-forgotten provision stopped being a secret and became reality. By morning, Ravenhall felt different, not because of any public announcement, but because small changes were visible everywhere. Empty desks, returned keys, quiet hallways, abandoned plants. Sometimes the most powerful decisions in a family are the ones made in complete silence. Silence can say more than an argument ever could, and inside Ravenhall, that silence was becoming impossible to ignore. While officials quietly enforced a decision rooted in the late Queen's carefully written instructions, the emotional toll grew heavier by the day. Isolde found herself facing a reality few could have imagined. She could still attend royal events, stand beside the monarchy, and fulfill her public duties, yet she could no longer claim the simple privilege of belonging in a private sense to the walls that had become part of her life. Many around her believed she should fight the ruling. One trusted advisor urged her to challenge it publicly, warning that silence might be read as acceptance. But Isolde understood the danger. A public battle would place Aldrich in an impossible position, deepen the rift with Rowan, and likely push Freya into defending the restriction even more forcefully. So instead of a spectacle, she chose restraint. Aldrich, for his part, searched tirelessly for an alternative. Could a different residence be arranged under another royal office? Could the arrangement be reframed, quietly adjusted? Each possibility collapsed almost as quickly as it appeared. The clause had been written with such care that every foreseeable workaround had already been anticipated. Then came a moment that quietly captured the entire story. As the formal handover was completed, Isolde surrendered her set of household keys. One small key lingered on her finger a moment longer than the rest before she removed it, placed it in an officer's palm, and walked away without looking back. From a distant window, Aldrich watched, instinctively raising a hand toward the glass before realizing she would never see the gesture. The most important scene, though, unfolded away from any public eye when Rowan requested a private meeting with Isolde. No advisors, no solicitors, just the two of them in a quiet room near Ravenhall's old chapel, where the conversation finally moved past rules and property and turned, for the first time, toward old wounds and years of carried weight. Rowan understood that prolonging the humiliation would hurt his father and fracture the family further. The real question left in the room was no longer whether his grandmother's instruction would stand. It was whether understanding could accomplish what authority alone had failed to do. Isolde walked into that meeting bracing for another difficult conversation, another reminder that in royal life, even the smallest decision could